After a car accident. My friend and I were both reborn. In our previous life. I was the deskmate of the aloof campus belle, Willow. He was the childhood friend of the wealthy heiress, Freya. We were the ship everyone at school rooted for. Childhood sweethearts. Evenly matched in every way, until the delinquent transfer student showed up. The rich heiress skipped class to go joyriding with him. And even washed her hands to cook for him. The cold campus queen's savior complex flared up. She was determined to rescue the delinquent. Little did they know. He was only using both of them as stand-ins to practice on. All because his true love had Willow's face and Freya's figure. Only then did everyone realize my friend and I were nothing but simps in unrequited love. The backup options left to pick up the pieces. Chapter 1. After the joint mock exam, my friend David and I were both publicly criticized by the school. I was reported because my grades had taken a cliff-like plunge. He was reported for disrupting exam discipline. Our homeroom teacher tried to persuade me with painstaking patience. George, it's okay to mess up once. But you absolutely can't be like this in the college entrance examination. You're already in your senior year. You need to stay steady. David muttered as if it were only natural. That's for sure. He's the future top scorer of the college entrance examination. Hearing that, the homeroom teacher stiffened his face and scolded him. I haven't even gotten to you yet, David. Sleeping in the exam hall would have been bad enough. But you even left your seat without permission and wandered into other classes. Disrupting exam discipline. Do you even have any respect for me as your homeroom teacher? I clenched the test paper in my hand and let out a weary sigh. This really couldn't be blamed on us. Who would have thought we'd be reborn right in the middle of an exam? Opening our eyes to test questions from 8 years ago, anyone would have been completely dumbfounded. Filling the entire paper with everything I could possibly remember was already my limit, let alone keeping my ranking within the top 2 of the grade. As for David, when he woke up, he thought he was on a film set. He got up leisurely and strolled through several classrooms, praising how realistic the set design was, until he walked straight into the principal who was supervising the exams. And just like that, both our names appeared on the school's public notice board. The cicadas suddenly shrieked at the top of their lungs. The camphor trees cast swaying shadows along the corridor. My thoughts were dragged back to the present. Through the half-open glass window, I caught sight of my deskmate, this time's top student in the grade, Willow. She was lowering her eyes, focused intently on explaining a problem to Makoto, the new transfer student. The girl's pale neck was as slender as a swan's. Wisps of hair by her temples partially veiled her brows and eyes. Her delicate fingers held the pen lightly as it moved across the paper. Perhaps she sensed the intensity of my gaze. She paused mid-stroke and suddenly turned her head to look over. Our eyes met and froze for several seconds, until the hot wind ruffled the hair on my forehead. Makoto, sitting in front of her, raised an eyebrow, his lips forming the words, "Willow, what are you looking at?" She withdrew her gaze at once and shook her head lightly. I lowered my head, staring at my palm as I slowly clenched my fist, carefully reconstructing the timeline. The second mock exam of senior year, the second month since Makoto transferred here. By now, he had already met everyone he was supposed to meet and grown familiar with everything he was meant to. There was still 1 week before Willow and I would have our first argument. 1 week later, during evening self-study, she would skip class with Makoto, just because he said he wanted to take her to see the fireworks show at Rose Plaza. When I found out, I would frown and ask her seriously, "Willow, have you seen the college entrance examination countdown on the bottom right of the blackboard?" We had been deskmates since middle school. Our tacit understanding was so strong that a single sentence from the other was enough to grasp the hidden meaning behind it. So she would let out a cold snort and say, "So what? I've studied for so many years and only skipped class this once. What difference could it possibly make? George, you should worry about yourself. Best 2 out of 3, you've already lost 1 round." But she didn't know, once something happens the first time, the second time becomes much easier. As for best 2 out of 3, that was a bet we had loved making since middle school. 3 exams made up 1 full round. Whoever won could make 1 request of the other. In my previous life, I had actually lost this round too. After 2 ties, I ended up in second place by a single point. Even after getting another chance, the result hadn't changed, only this time, my own score looked utterly miserable. I lifted my head again and looked over, utterly certain. "Willow, you won't have another chance to beat me." Chapter 2. The homeroom teacher talked until his mouth went dry. At last, in a rare act of mercy, he waved his hand and let us return to class. The moment we stepped over the threshold, we heard a low buzz of discussion. Someone was holding the ranking sheet and sighing dramatically. "My God, I've been shipping this evenly matched pair for so long, are we really heading for a bad ending?" "It's fine. The childhood sweethearts ship I root for already got a bad ending anyway." As soon as the words fell, a burst of girls' laughter drifted from down the corridor. We turned around instinctively and caught sight of a well-proportioned figure. David froze slightly. It was the childhood friend he had loved for many, many years in both his past and present life. Freya. She wore a fitted white athletic jacket with a matching pleated skirt, a wristband wrapped around her right hand. With her left, she brushed aside the damp strands of hair clinging to her forehead. Her features were delicate and sharply defined, her eyes lively and clear. Her entire being radiated the vitality and brightness unique to girls her age. She was completely different from Willow's cool detachment. Freya let out a soft scoff. "Move, you're in the way." Her tone was arrogant, her expression tinged with disdain. Tilting her head slightly, she looked straight ahead and stopped in front of David and me. If this had been the 17-year-old David from our previous life, he would have refused to budge and snapped back at her. "The hallway doesn't belong to you," just like they always did, bickering non-stop. But this was David 8 years later. He merely shrugged, calm and composed, and stepped half a pace to the right, leaving space for her to pass. Her figure gradually receded down the corridor. The earlier whispers dropped even lower. "See, that bad ending is completely final." There was another reason they said that. A week ago, Makoto had skipped class with Freya. Something happened outside campus. Makoto got into a conflict with some people, and in the chaos, Freya was struck and injured near her brow bone. When she returned home, facing her parents' concern, she casually said she had just fallen. David couldn't hold it in and told her parents the truth, that she had skipped class. He didn't reveal the specific details, but it was enough for her parents to start keeping her under strict supervision, escorting her to and from school every day. That very night, Freya smashed the teacup David had given her right in front of him and demanded indignantly, "Did I ask you to meddle? Stop pretending to be a good guy. You think I don't know? It's because I skipped class with Makoto that you couldn't wait to tell my parents." "David, do you think I don't know what you're thinking? It's disgusting, absolutely nauseating." I think I will always remember the way David looked then, utterly devastated, as if his heart had turned to ashes. He gave a self-mocking smile and said, "The doctor said if the wound had been even a fraction of an inch off, she might have lost that eye." I patted his shoulder without saying anything. Everyone walks their own path. Outsiders can't truly understand another person's feelings, nor offer perfect advice. Sometimes, silent companionship is the greatest comfort. You only understand the taste of it after you've lived through it yourself. Just like David and I in our previous life. Stubborn and headstrong, just like the uncertain roads that lie ahead for Willow and Freya in this life. If this were our previous life, tomorrow night David would lower his head first, take the initiative to talk to Freya and apologize, offering her a graceful way out and ending their Cold War. After all, that was how it had always been for so many years, every conflict resolved the same way. Given a second chance, I turned my head to look at David. He sensed my unspoken question, casually brushing a hand through his hair. He smiled, free-spirited, flamboyant, yet still refined, just like the superstar he would become in the future, with tens of millions of fans. He said, "What's that saying again? Be a real man, not a simp." Chapter 3. In order to make up for the coursework I had forgotten as quickly as possible, I entered a state of shutting out everything beyond my studies, burying myself completely in textbooks and exam papers. Occasionally, I would spare some time to tutor David when he came to ask questions. He would speak with visible frustration, even if it might already be too late. "I still want to try. Otherwise in the future I'll get roasted on shows for my terrible grades back in school. That's a permanent stain on my life." I felt like crying but couldn't. My gaze drifted to the upper right corner of the test paper I had folded neatly. That exam would likely become the biggest academic stain of this second chance at life. Freya happened to pass by on her way to get water and let out a mocking laugh. "Hey, you've been mediocre for years. Now you suddenly decide to work hard. Isn't that a bit pretentious?" The hand I was using to draw a diagram paused. Before I could even look up, I heard David chuckle. "Some people are willing to stay in the trash heap their whole lives. I'm not." I smiled as well. "That's right. Even after my cliff-like drop from a mistake, my score is still better than certain people's." In truth, Freya's grades weren't bad. They just weren't at the very top of the pyramid. In our previous life, she had gotten into university through her status as an art specialty student. At the peak of his popularity, David had even registered their marriage publicly and made an official announcement. Fortunately, his acting skills were solid, his professional ability unquestionable, and he had no bad habits. Combined with their childhood friend's background, he barely withstood the massive loss of fans and the overwhelming wave of criticism during that time. Unfortunately, just as the David heartbeat ship fandom began to grow larger and larger, news of Freya entering a hotel late at night with Makoto shot straight to #1 on the trending searches. The affection of youth had ultimately turned into strangers passing by. Faced with my added jab, Freya rolled her eyes. "Oh really? Then why are you falling further and further behind, Willow?" I froze slightly. Only then did I realize the seat to my left had been empty since evening self-study began. It suddenly hit me. Tonight was the night Willow would skip class with Makoto to watch the fireworks show. Originally, Something like this would have involved Freya, but since she had been under strict supervision by her parents lately and was pretending to behave in order to reduce her sentence, the one who went instead became Willow. Willow was known throughout the school for being excellent in both character and academics. The teacher doing attendance checks would assume she had taken leave and not think much of it. The homeroom teacher would assume she had her own arrangements and wouldn't interfere, so skipping class went unusually smoothly for her. As for Makoto, he had requested 3 days off under the excuse of undergoing a collective removal surgery of useless accessory tissue in the human head, in other words, having his wisdom teeth removed. After the final bell of evening self-study rang, I stayed in the classroom for another half hour to finish the last math paper. David stayed and worked alongside me. When we were done, we walked into the silent stairwell and ran straight into Willow, who had returned to school to pack up her things. 8 steps separated us. I stood above, looking down at her. She stood below, looking up at me. David clicked his tongue and pulled me to leave, but Willow shifted slightly and blocked our way. She looked at me and asked, "George, aren't you going to ask me why I didn't come to self-study?" I smiled at her calmly. "Willow, that's your own business. I won't interfere in any of your decisions. After making the same mistake once, I would never allow myself to make it a second time." David crossed his arms, looking puzzled, though there was still a hint of teasing in his expression. "Listen to that. You're just deskmates. Why would George need to care why you skipped self-study?" Deskmates, a word innocent on the surface, yet filled with endless possibilities. It could mean 10,000 different things, or absolutely nothing at all. Chapter 4. But a distance even more ambiguous than deskmates is actually sitting in front of and behind each other. For example, Makoto and Freya. Unlike the restrained and modest way he acted when asking Willow questions, Makoto's daily interactions with Freya were full of playful teasing. At first, he used his pen to hook the end of Freya's ponytail from behind. She shook her head in annoyance, but he only became more deliberate in provoking her. Later, the two of them started playing a game of you draw, I guess. Makoto would use his pen to write characters on Freya's back for her to guess. She would turn around, pretending to be angry. "Makoto, you're cheating. It's obviously T, not that other character." Makoto would laugh and reply helplessly, all right, it's T, it's T." I withdrew my gaze, yet from the corner of my eye I saw Willow watching them as well. On the test paper in front of her, a single question had remained unsolved for half of evening self-study. David once told me that the writing on the back game had started when they were children. Their parents, trying to make them quiet down, told them to write characters on each other's backs. Whoever recognized more would earn an extra little red flower. Over time, it became a game that seemed unique to the two of them, but the truth was, anyone could replace the other. The cicadas had gone silent. This sweltering summer was finally coming to an end. Yet as the college entrance examination countdown ticked down day by day, under the immense academic pressure, students would naturally look for ways to entertain themselves during short breaks. In the past, they would hype up and ship Willow and me. Of course, neither of us had ever explained or denied it. There was an unspoken indulgence in our silence. Now, however, they had started betting on whether Willow or Freya would end up with Makoto. The bet formed after a PE class. The PE teacher had something to handle and let us move freely. Some students relaxed outdoors. Others hurried back to class to study. Freya was gossiping with classmates. Willow was in the classroom studying with Makoto. David and I bought a bottle of cola and headed back toward class. On the way, we ran into Makoto, who had come downstairs early because he couldn't focus anymore. He grinned and greeted us. "Yo, George, David, you guys like this too? I love it as well. Too bad my family's poor. I can't afford it. So tragic. Liking something but not being able to have it, that's the worst." He sighed theatrically. "Guess I can only watch it become someone else's." I was just about to twist open the bottle and shove it straight into his mouth when, before I could say a word, a soccer ball came flying at high speed and smashed the glass of the fire hose cabinet beside us. Reacting instantly, I grabbed David and pulled him away. The very next second, Makoto let out a piercing howl. Looking down, I saw a shard of glass deeply embedded in his leg. Blood began flowing immediately. The first to rush over was Freya. Her eyes reddened in panic. As she helped Makoto up, she shouted at David, who was standing there watching, "Move." Then she supported Makoto toward the infirmary. Then Willow appeared. There was something in her eyes, a kind of disappointment, as if she had seen through everything. She said, "I saw it. You clearly had the chance to push him away just now. Why did you just stand there and do nothing?" I clenched my hand, which had also been cut by the glass, and smiled at her. "Willow, whether he gets hurt or not, what does that have to do with me? Whether I help him or not, what does that have to do with you?" After that, the betting pool in class formed on its own. David drank his cola and laughed, casually saying, "I bet neither of them will end up with Makoto." No one heard him, except me, and I agreed, because I had seen the person Makoto truly liked, A girl whose face resembled Willow's, but whose figure resembled Freya's. Chapter 5. That girl was the one he had secretly admired before transferring schools. She was strikingly beautiful and came from a wealthy family. That kind of untouchable, high above the crowd girl held an irresistible attraction for Makoto, who had grown up accustomed to feeling inferior. On top of that, there was the frustration of being forcibly transferred because of overly frequent contact. Her parents had demanded it. That sense of defeat only made him obsess over her even more. His repeated truancy had actually been to sneak off and see her, dyeing his hair, street racing, acting rebellious, hanging out with shady people every day. It was all just to catch her attention. After the college entrance examination in our previous life, both Willow and Freya confessed their feelings to him. What they received in return was a smile tinged with disdain and understanding. He said smugly, "Haven't we always just been friends? Isn't that better? Being friends is more stable than being lovers." Not long after, he successfully conquered the girl he had once had a crush on. I remember Willow standing there in a daze when she saw the two of them together. The expression on her face shifted visibly, from shock to grievance. Two similar faces. That alone explained everything. Freya realized she had merely been a substitute for comfort during a shopping trip at a clothing store. A brash girl mistook her for someone else and blurted out, "Ha! From the back I thought you were Big Bro's sister-in-law." As the words fell, Makoto appeared, strolling over lazily, his right arm wrapped around a brightly smiling girl. Everyone greeted her warmly as sister-in-law. Freya's smile froze on her lips. After that, we never saw Makoto again. We only heard that he had eloped with that girl and moved to another city to live together. The next time we heard about him was 8 years later. By then, Willow and I were already together. With the support of David's connections, I had successfully started a business and built a fortune worth over 100 million. Willow, after entering a direct PhD program, had obtained a senior professional title and become the youngest master's supervisor at her university. And yet, the proposal I had meticulously prepared was interrupted by Makoto's sudden appearance. Looking back now, the scene was almost absurdly dramatic. Anyone unaware might have thought we were filming some over-the-top melodramatic web series. That day, Makoto was gravely injured, yet he still insisted on coming to confess his feelings to Willow, just to see her one last time. I stood there clutching the ring I hadn't even had the chance to place on Willow's finger, quietly watching as she escorted Makoto to the hospital. She even accused me of being heartless. After all, you were classmates. How can you just stand by and let him die? Unfortunately, at that time, I was a simp. In my eyes, she automatically carried a soft focus filter. I simply thought that was just her personality. I never once considered the possibility of lingering feelings. If I had used my brain even a little, I would have realized her words made no sense. I had already called an ambulance. How was that, letting him die? And the double standard was almost laughable. Once, I merely gave directions to a girl who asked, and Willow gave me the cold shoulder for an entire week, saying I lacked boundaries. Yet when I was proposing, she insisted on personally taking Makoto to the hospital. Somehow, that had to be her responsibility. Later, Makoto was hospitalized. The tenderness and concern in Willow's eyes were nearly impossible to conceal. After standing me up again and again, it was her increasingly distant gaze and drifting thoughts when she faced me that said everything. During yet another date, when her phone suddenly rang halfway through dinner, I pressed the decline button. Calmly, I said to her, "Let's finish this meal. Consider it a dignified ending to what we had." She froze in place and called my name in a slightly panicked voice. "George." I didn't argue. I leisurely finished the last spoonful of soup, signaled the waiter for the bill, then stood up. "Willow, next time we meet, we won't say hello." But that night, she didn't go to see Makoto. I still don't know why. The next day, the trending topic, Freya entering a hotel late at night with a man, shot straight to #1. At that very moment, David, who had been live streaming, proudly showing off how beautiful his wife was, instantly became the internet's biggest clown. Memes about him spread across the entire web. The king of "I'm fine" after getting cheated on. Unexpectedly, no one could get in touch with him. Until 3 days later, he came to see me. David rubbed his temples wearily, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm so tired, George. I really can't hold on anymore. I already gave her the divorce papers to let them be together. Why won't she agree?" I let out a soft sigh and glanced at my phone, which kept vibrating. The caller ID showed Willow, just as the car was about to exit the tunnel. The blinding light made me instinctively close my eyes. When I opened them again, I was back 8 years ago. Chapter 6. Unlike the open hostility between David and Freya, Willow and I still maintained a trace of decorum. Occasionally, when a teacher called us up to work through the most difficult final problem together, we would set aside all grievances and discuss it as usual. Then we would listen to the teacher's encouragement. "You two are not only competitors on the road to the college entrance examination, but also comrades fighting side by side. After studying hard for more than 10 years, the finish line is right ahead. Don't let anything affect you. I smiled and nodded. One advantage of never having stopped studying in my previous life was that when I returned to senior year, I could quickly retrieve the coursework buried deep in my memory. Once my grades recovered to their original level, they would no longer be easily shaken. The one affected was Willow. The day before the mock exam was her birthday. After evening self-study ended, Makoto gave her a gift, a wristwatch bought from a roadside stall. Some girls who saw it exclaimed enviously, "Wow, doesn't giving a watch mean a confession? Seriously, you're going to start rumors just because he gave her some cheap watch?" The one who responded was Freya. She shot the speaker an extremely displeased look, her gaze sliding casually over Willow's wrist. At critical moments, the worst thing is a distracted mind. I don't know whether Makoto intended it as a confession, but Willow was definitely unsettled because of it. After the exam, her ranking dropped out of the top 10 for the first time. There were multiple blank questions on her paper, left unanswered for no apparent reason. As for me, after pulling an all-nighter of relentless studying, I returned to first place. This round, I won. For some reason, I suddenly recalled the request she had earned the last time she won our bet. In the past, whenever she won, her requests were usually simple, asking me to treat her to a meal, or punishing me by making me do a few extra sets of mock papers. Except for that one time, my pen scratched steadily across the page as I remembered that night. I had leaned back helplessly in my chair and asked her what she planned to request this time. David had mentioned a newly opened roast goose restaurant near school that tasted great. I had already intended to take her there to try it. After a long silence with no reply, just as I was about to ask again, she lowered her eyes and handed me a note. The handwriting on it was as graceful and delicate as she was. In a soft voice, she said, "I'll save this request until after the college entrance examination." Curious, I glanced at her. From her cheeks down to her neck, a large patch of red had bloomed. I don't know what she originally intended to ask for, but it definitely wouldn't have been the kind of request from our previous life. Helping the person you like pursue the person they like, just thinking about it makes you want to slap yourself twice for being that foolish. Later, she confessed to Makoto, and failed. Just like in this life, when she eventually learned that Makoto's gift of a watch was not a confession at all, but, as he put it, "I gave it to you before the exam so you could wear it in the exam hall. Wouldn't that help you manage your time better?" He smiled in that careless yet faintly helpless way. "But I didn't expect your grades to drop this time." After a pause, he added jokingly, "Willow, you're not going to blame it on the watch I gave you, are you?" Of course she wouldn't, but this time, the ones publicly criticized by the school and summoned by the homeroom teacher were her and Freya. She, for her abnormal drop in grades, and Freya, because of Makoto. Chapter 7. It started with a group fight. On one side were students in school uniforms, on the other were idle troublemakers from society, and in the crowd, Freya spotted Makoto. In the chaotic alley, Makoto was shielding a tear-streaked girl behind him, fighting against several men armed with various tools. Coincidentally, Freya's recent effort to behave had begun to show results. Seeing that she had stopped skipping class, her parents had suspended the mandatory pickups and drop-offs, only requiring her to return home on time. Freya had courage. The moment she saw Makoto, she ran toward him without hesitation and ended up taking hits alongside him. It wasn't until someone called the police that both sides scattered in all directions. Before leaving, the other group brandished a baseball bat and pointed it around menacingly. The ringleader, full of hostility, spat out, "Makoto, I won't let this go." Freya wiped the grime off her face and asked Makoto anxiously whether he was hurt. He smiled and shook his head, explaining that he had happened to run into a girl he once acknowledged as his sworn younger sister, Sophia. 3 days later, Freya received a public disciplinary notice because of the incident. The homeroom teacher called both Freya and Willow into the hallway and lectured them earnestly. "One mistake isn't a big deal, but you absolutely cannot make mistakes in the college entrance examination. Willow, I've always trusted you. This one doesn't count. Don't let it affect your mindset. As long as you stay steady, you can absolutely compete for this year's top scorer in the college entrance examination." Willow lowered her eyes in silence. Freya, however, spoke in a light tone, half acting cute, half coaxing. "All right, teacher. Then this time doesn't count for me either. Okay, I won't let it affect my mindset. I'll definitely perform well in the college entrance examination." The homeroom teacher frowned, his tone turning stern. "Whether Makoto studies or not, I don't care anymore. I've already given up on him. But you're different with your grades. If you put in effort, you can get into a good university. If you keep hanging around Makoto, you'll regret it sooner or later. The exam is almost here. If this continues, I really will have to call your parents." Freya pouted and argued back. They were bullying that girl. Makoto was just standing up for what's right. What's wrong with that? Teacher, can you stop being biased against him just because his grades are bad? I know a student's priority should be studying, but learning how to be a good person is important too. Her reasoning sounded well structured. Willow remained silent the entire time. In the end, after Freya's persistent pleading and dramatics, the homeroom teacher reluctantly agreed not to call her parents and left in frustration. Makoto immediately appeared to thank her. Just then, a group of students ran past playfully. One of them accidentally bumped into Freya. She staggered and fell, clutching her ankle with a sharp intake of breath. Hearing that, Makoto crouched down without hesitation, supported her foot, and took off her shoe. A large bruise was already forming around her ankle. The next second, Makoto lifted her up to carry her to the infirmary, completely ignoring Willow, who stood nearby without moving. Freya looked delighted, nestling obediently into his arms. David and I were walking by with cola in hand and hadn't even paid attention at first. But Freya suddenly called out, "David." David let out a small burp and turned his head in confusion. After glancing at their situation, he seemed to understand and grinned. "Don't worry, I don't know anything." She fell silent for a moment, staring quietly at him. Then she gave a soft snort. "You'd better remember what you just said." In our previous life, Freya hadn't run into Makoto that day, because that afternoon, someone in class had been playing a fortune-telling card game. Both Freya and David had been curious about their futures. After drawing their cards, the interpretations were: one red, shining across the four corners of the world; the other, fading into the sea of people. The smile in David's eyes had vanished. A faint crease formed between his brows. Freya had laughed lightly, dismissing it without care. Chapter 8. As the college entrance examination drew nearer, the betting pool was approaching its conclusion. Some were certain that after graduation, Makoto would confess to Freya. They began analyzing how well the two matched, talking about the classic campus pairing of a rebellious bad boy school king and a wealthy heiress. I tilted my head toward David, who was resting his forehead on one hand, pen in the other, marking up problems on his test paper. Perhaps feelings that are too steady are easily overlooked, or perhaps years of familiarity conceal the thrill of a racing heartbeat. And so, Freya's attention gradually shifted to Makoto, the one who could sweet-talk her and bring her excitement. Of course, others believed the combination of a cool, domineering school king and an aloof campus queen was just as common. For example, Willow. To be honest, I never quite understood how Willow began to like Makoto. In the beginning, she had openly disapproved of students like him who neglected their studies. Makoto didn't care at all. Instead, he started asking her questions, seeking her guidance with apparent humility. Unlike me, after every discussion, Willow and I would simply exchange a calm smile. Makoto, however, would prepare little surprises and small gifts for her each time. Gradually, she grew accustomed to being around him. One evening during self-study, there was a brief power outage. In the darkness, I heard a startled cry and a muffled grunt. A few seconds later, when the lights came back on, I saw Willow sprawled on top of Makoto. Makoto helped her up. Willow lowered her head, biting her lip as she apologized. Her cheeks flushed in embarrassment. I returned to solving the final challenge problem the teacher had assigned. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Willow's pen hovering motionless over her paper for a long time. By the time I finished every question, the steps she had written were completely chaotic. Naturally, the answer was wrong. Of course, beyond simple affection, when two girls share feelings for the same boy, it's hard to say there isn't a competitive edge born from jealousy. Yet in this rivalry between them, the first to be eliminated was Freya. Back during the group fight, the opposing side had threatened not to let Makoto off the hook, but the one they targeted was Freya. By the time the news reached our class, Freya had already been sent to the hospital. It rained heavily that day, the downpour drowning out every sound. She had been slapped so hard her eardrum was perforated. The injury was severe enough that she could no longer continue preparing for the exams. Some classmates whom Freya had once helped, carrying water, moving desks, suggested visiting her at the hospital. Makoto went as well. When they returned, everyone's opinions shifted. No one believed anymore that the two of them would end up together. Word spread that Freya's mother, having learned about the earlier fight, had confronted Makoto in the hospital. His response was shameless. With a careless grin, he said, "You're talking to the wrong person. Your daughter came to me on her own. How is that my fault? I wasn't the one who bullied her. What does it have to do with me? I just came as a classmate out of goodwill to visit. Why are you trying to pin this on me?" Someone asked how Freya reacted. Those who were there said she simply lay against the hospital bed, wiping away tears quietly. She didn't say a single word, because the truth was impossible to refute. Chapter 9. David went to visit Freya shortly before the college entrance examination. He went because his parents brought him. Freya had just woken up from anesthesia after surgery. In her hazy state, she saw David sitting by the bed, carefully peeling an apple. Her voice choked as she spoke. "David, I had a very, very long dream. In it, you rose to fame and became a huge star, but at the height of your popularity, You proposed to someone and registered your marriage, David replied simply. Oh, Freya asked. Aren't you going to ask who that person was? David smiled carelessly. Freya, whoever it was, it wouldn't have been you. As her face turned pale and flustered, David placed the perfectly peeled apple onto a clean plate and stood up. Actually, peeled apples aren't that great. They oxidize too quickly. The freshness disappears fast. He had learned to peel an apple in one continuous strip because of Freya. Like me, David had been a simp in our previous life. So when Freya once said, I don't like apples, but I like peeled apples. I don't like shrimp, but I like peeled shrimp, he naturally went and learned these so-called boyfriend essentials. To peel an apple without breaking the skin, you have to go very, very slowly. But this useless skill would probably never be used again. After Freya left, the class gradually began to assume that Willow and Makoto would end up together. During breaks, you could always see her discussing problems with him. And so, even though Willow and I were deskmates, the closest seats in the room, for a long time we hardly had a proper conversation. After I finished explaining a problem to David, he glanced at Willow, who was still repeatedly explaining the same question to Makoto, and laughed. How many times has she explained that one already? Some people would rather think they didn't explain it clearly enough than admit the other person wasn't listening at all. My pen paused. I looked at Makoto, who was spinning his pen absent-mindedly, and recalled something from a few days ago. When I passed by an internet cafe, I saw Makoto, who in our previous life should have been lying in a hospital bed, standing outside with the girl he had once shielded during the fight. They seemed to be arguing. In the end, the girl slapped him and stormed off. After that, Makoto began entering and leaving school together with Willow. My last conversation with Willow happened after the final mock exam in our best 2 out of 3 bet. As expected, I won. On the eve of the college entrance examination, the classroom was empty. Willow and I stood side by side in the corridor, looking at the sports field bathed in sunset. Light flowed over us as she tilted her head and asked, Go on, what's your request? On the track below, boys and girls in school uniforms ran in the fading light. I turned to look into her eyes and asked, Willow, do you remember the request you said you'd save until after the college entrance examination? She met my gaze and nodded. I pursed my lips slightly. My request is simple. Never say the request you saved. She looked up at me, her expression complicated. The next second, Makoto suddenly appeared and called out, Willow, let's go. I'll take you for a ride around the back hill. I watched her back as she left, then turned and walked in the opposite direction. The trajectory of this life had already changed. I don't know what request she would have saved until after the exam this time, but whatever it was, I didn't want to hear it again. In our previous life, after winning that bet, the request I made of her was to apply to University C together. It had always been our shared goal since the day we met, though at the time, there had also been an element of gamble in it. One weekend afternoon before that, someone played Those Bygone Years over the school broadcast station, sparking a wave of discussion about the plot. When the conversation turned to the male lead giving up a 13-point final question for the female lead, the class argued endlessly. The boys said, What kind of top-tier simp would throw away his future for a girl? Many of the girls countered, He probably couldn't solve it anyway. He was just pretending to be devoted. Willow, however, looked wistful as she said, I think the fact that he quietly sacrificed something just to be together, that in itself is romantic, isn't it? One boy scoffed. I don't think sacrificing your future for someone else is right, and I definitely don't think it's romantic just because a man sacrifices for a woman. In mainstream stories, men are always put in the position of the sacrificer, as if the world is being told that sacrifice is a man's natural duty. But why? Why is it always the man who gives things up? Why can't it be the woman sacrificing for the men? Willow argued back. I never said girls can't give. Sacrifice should be mutual. If it were someone I liked, I'd be willing to do the same. Hearing that, I hesitated. Back then, I was genuinely worried she might leave a question blank for Makoto, so I made that request with a 1% hope in my heart. Fortunately, she fulfilled it. Given a second chance, Those Bygone Years played once more. Only then did I realize that the reason she hadn't left any questions blank in our previous life might not have been because of our agreement at all. Because in this life, without my request, she still carefully completed every single question and achieved the same score as before. The regret was this. She proved herself with her score, but expressed her feelings with her choice of university applications. Chapter 10. I found out that Willow had changed her university applications at the graduation party. I was accepting congratulations from classmates on one side, while consoling a sighing David on the other. Aside from Freya, who hadn't been able to take the college entrance examination, no one's scores had changed. I was still the top scorer of the college entrance examination, 1 point ahead of Willow. David held his score sheet, identical to the one from our previous life, and shuffled over with a long face. All that effort for nothing. I really thought being reborn would let me make a comeback. I smiled helplessly. If it worked like that, wouldn't every repeat test taker end up in a top university? You hadn't touched a book for 8 years and came straight back to senior year. The fact that you matched your previous score is already impressive. Before I finished speaking, a wave of cheering erupted. Everyone was teasing Willow and Makoto. Now that we were no longer students, people no longer bothered hiding their suggestive glances. Someone raised a glass toward them with a grin. Should I wish you both a bright future, or a happy marriage? Willow lowered her head, cheeks flushed. Makoto paused briefly, then waved his hands for everyone to stop talking nonsense. But students fresh out of the college entrance examination are fueled by limitless enthusiasm. The atmosphere in the private room had reached a peak. People began chanting for the two of them to get together. Amid the cheers, Willow lifted her head and said shyly, "Makoto, I heard University B has a freshman entrance challenge, and couples have a higher winning rate. Should we participate together?" The implication was subtle. The room fell silent for a split second, then erupted into gasps and screams. Even David couldn't help blurting out in disbelief, "Holy hell, does that mean she gave up her guaranteed spot at University C and downgraded her application to University B?" Before I could respond, the door to the private room was suddenly pushed open. A group of people crowded in, surrounding a woman. It was Makoto's sworn younger sister, Sophia, the one whose face resembled Willow's and whose figure resembled Freya's. The men at the front said awkwardly, "Makoto, we really couldn't stop her." Everyone froze. The class monitor stepped forward to ask what they wanted. The woman ignored him completely and walked straight up to Makoto. Smack. Another slap landed across his face. "Makoto, is this how you take responsibility for me? Looking for a side chick behind my back? Who is she?" When she raised her hand to strike again, Makoto quickly grabbed her wrist, forcing a placating smile onto his face. "Wife, it's a misunderstanding. Let's go back and talk." She snorted and turned her face away. "Who's your wife?" Makoto grinned and turned to his friends. "You guys tell me, who's my wife?" They answered in unison, "Sophia." Then they chorused, "Hello, sister-in-law." Makoto pushed Willow away when she instinctively tried to grab his sleeve. He gently rubbed the hand Sophia had used to slap him. "Did that hurt your hand? Wife, don't be mad." "Okay, how would I dare? It's all a misunderstanding. Isn't having you enough for me?" A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sophia kept a tight expression, then lightly kicked him. Makoto wrapped an arm around her and turned back to the room sheepishly. "Sorry, everyone. Seems like there's been a misunderstanding. This is my girlfriend." David burst out laughing. Leaning close, he whispered to me, "If one person's illusion is a misunderstanding, what about a whole crowd's illusion?" The time I showed off my relationship on livestream was already clown enough. Didn't expect someone purer than that. I'm dying. If I ever can't carry on, I'll just live off this memory. The confession ended abruptly. Sincerity dissolved into farce. Color drained inch by inch from Willow's face. Suddenly, I felt nothing but boredom. I avoided her panicked gaze and left with David. In this second life, the only thing that seemed unchanged was Makoto. He still eloped with Sophia and moved to another city to live together. After that summer, we all scattered to different corners of the country. The next time we met was 8 years later, at an alumni reunion. Chapter 11. Just like in our previous life, David became a red-hot superstar. Because of scheduling conflicts, he couldn't attend the reunion in person, but in his own name, he donated $10 million to our alma mater to support its development. As a centennial anniversary gift, then an interview video of him was played on the big screen. The reporter asked sharply, "Netizens often mock your academic performance back in middle school. How do you respond to that?" David smiled easily and looked straight into the camera with confidence. "My best friend once told me that we have to allow for the fact that some people's talents simply aren't in academics. But what's important is this: no matter what your talent is, if you waste it for too long, even heaven will take it back." For example, Willow. Hearing that name again felt like something from another lifetime. Our homeroom teacher sighed to me with deep regret. If I had paid a little more attention back then, maybe none of this would have happened. You'd never think that girl was such a hopeless romantic. I heard that after being played by Makoto and missing out on University C, she was depressed for a long time. Then one winter, she got into a car accident. After waking up, she seemed suddenly clear-headed and decided to repeat the final year and retake the college entrance examination. But repeating a year is like being reborn. Rebirth doesn't guarantee a comeback. Repeating doesn't guarantee redemption. Between cause and effect, there is both inevitability and coincidence. When even one factor shifts, the result may not repeat itself. And besides, her transformation had been so abrupt that she was likely reborn too, but the time left to her was already limited. This time, unlike in our previous life, she didn't retake the exam successfully and rise step by step to become a master's supervisor. She failed. After enduring setback after setback, she was crushed. The confidence and brilliance she once carried were completely gone. In the end, She had no choice but to let go of her pride and attend the university she had always looked down upon. I remembered receiving a message on the day I graduated from University C. It read, "One wrong step, and you can never reach the finish line again." It came from an unknown number. I didn't reply. An alumni reunion, at its core, is still a battlefield and a marketplace of status. No one looks at past glory, they look at present achievement. So it didn't surprise me that neither Freya nor Willow appeared. What surprised me was hearing people once again discussing the plot of those bygone years. A student said, "I think changing your university application just to be together is really romantic." A young girl turned to who was probably her boyfriend and asked, "If it were you, would you do that for me?" He paused, then countered, "What about you? Would you do it for me?" I stopped walking and turned to face them. Smiling gently, I said, "Your future and your love life are never inherently in conflict. If you truly like someone, you shouldn't give up your prospects. You should hold on to every opportunity even tighter. After all, people's hearts change easily. You need to become strong enough that they have no better option, and you do. Only then can you keep the initiative in your own hands, don't you think?" When I stepped out of the school gates, I saw that a long silent group chat had suddenly come back to life. Someone suggested taking the opportunity to organize a class reunion. Everyone agreed. Coincidentally, the venue was the same private room where we had held our graduation party. As luck would have it, David had just finished promoting his new drama and rushed back in time. As the superstar whose posters covered the entire city, he became the center of attention the moment he appeared. Some female classmates asked for autographs. Others wanted photos. David smiled and obliged them all, until Freya, who arrived late, walked up to him and said softly, "Long time no see." Chapter 12. 8 years is a long time. In fact, David's parents never moved. It was just that after the college entrance examination, he entered the film and television industry by chance. He shot to fame overnight, and his schedule became so packed that he rarely had time to come back. Even when he returned home to visit his parents, he would leave in a hurry. So all these years, he hadn't seen Freya again, though he had heard about her situation from his parents. After the perforated eardrum incident, her hearing was permanently damaged. After graduation, she faced repeated discrimination when looking for work. In the end, she could only return to her hometown and take an ordinary job just to make ends meet. I remembered her figure on stage in our previous life, singing beneath the lights. She hadn't been as dazzling as David, but she had still been admired and respected. Now, the distance between them was so great that even the chance to be entangled again no longer existed. Even if they met, there would be little to say, and that was indeed the case. This time, David had returned to take his parents away. After this, he might never come back again. When the others heard this, they asked in surprise, "Does that mean we'll never see you again?" Freya was the one who answered. She curved her lips slightly and said softly, "How could we not see him? His presence is everywhere in the world." David smiled but said nothing more. I thought, if nothing unexpected happened, this would probably be the end of their story. It was hard to say when they had begun drifting apart. There had been no dramatic push and pull, no solemn farewell, just a sudden realization that the real parting had actually begun many years ago, in an ordinary turn of the body. Someone, always eager to stir things up, laughed and said, "Back then we all thought you two would end up together. Who wouldn't ship childhood sweethearts?" Too bad Makoto transferred in later. At that point, everyone suddenly realized that Makoto wasn't present. My hand paused slightly as I lifted my glass of water. In my memory, the earliest image tied to that name was of the day he first transferred in, timid and insecure. To mask his unease, he kept his distance from everyone, awkwardly doodling on his desk. Whenever he failed an exam, he would return to school the next day with bruises on his face. Yet he still didn't dare ask the teacher questions. He would just clutch his failing paper and quietly wipe away tears in the classroom. So I had spoken up kindly. "Hey, man, if you don't understand something, just ask me. I'll teach you." Later, someone rushed in to say David had gotten into a conflict with someone. I put down my pen and called out, "Willow, do me a favor, help the new student with this problem." She turned at the sound of her name. Makoto looked up. The memory cut off. Someone tilted their head and asked curiously, "You guys don't know. After he eloped with that girl, they had no financial support. He didn't work much either, just drifted around. Not long after, that girl cheated on him. In a moment of rage, he hit her, and she miscarried. Then her parents showed up with dozens of people. They broke his leg and blinded one of his eyes. The same ending as in our previous life. At this point, mentioning Willow was inevitable, because Makoto had gone to see her, and she had only said coldly, "So what if we were classmates? What does that have to do with me?" I set down my glass. Amid the waves of sighs and murmurs, I turned to look at the woman who had sat silently in the corner the entire time. Just like the first day of middle school, when we entered the classroom and chose our own seats, I had glanced once, and seen the quiet girl sitting by the window. Chapter 13. Compared to the deep bond between David and Freya, childhood sweethearts whose parents were neighbors, the connection between Willow and me as deskmates was, in truth, rather shallow. Even the once widely discussed, evenly matched, ship between us stopped being mentioned after she confessed to Makoto. Everyone assumed it had just been harmless fun. No one knew that I had truly liked Willow, liked her enough, in my previous life, to compromise again and again, to trust her so much that I ignored every irregularity and every excuse. After several rounds of drinks, I stepped out onto the terrace to clear my head. That was when Willow walked up beside me. I turned slightly and looked at her face, almost identical to how she had looked 8 years later in our previous life. The only difference was the absence of that former pride and confidence. She said, "We never really had a chance to meet again. Congratulations, President Wong. Your dream came true. Back in middle school, we once discussed our dreams," Willow had said earnestly. "In the future, I want to become a really accomplished teacher, someone who can teach and also research and create new knowledge." After thinking for a moment, I had looked at her and replied, "Then I'll become an ultra-rich CEO. So you'll have all the funding you need to do your research." Later, we both achieved our dreams. I invested in her research projects without calculating the cost. Once, she had hesitated and asked me, "Aren't you worried that the investment might fail and you'll lose everything?" I had answered, "I'm not afraid. As long as you love me, I'll never count as a failure." Thinking about it now, I really was the failure. Memory and reality overlapped. Suddenly, she said quietly, "I'm sorry," so softly that I almost thought I had imagined it. She lifted her eyes to look at me. After a brief silence, she continued, "It sounds ridiculous, but that year when I was in the car accident and almost died on the operating table, it felt like I entered another world. In that world, we went to the same university and ended up together. You became an entrepreneur. Just like in this life, I became a master's supervisor. You even proposed to me. Really, that does sound ridiculous." I cut her off before she could finish. She gave a strained smile, her expression dimming. As I turned to leave, she asked softly, "George, if I hadn't changed my university application back then, do you think we might have ended up together?" "No," I answered without hesitation. She seemed about to say more, but a sudden cheer erupted from inside the private room. Cutting her off, we turned toward the noise. The door had opened. Unlike that chaotic night years ago when a group of aggressive troublemakers stormed in, this time a tall, elegant woman stood at the doorway. She was Anna, the investment partner in my new project in South City. She said gently, "I heard President Wong was here attending a class reunion. As his investor, I'll be covering all expenses tonight. I hope everyone has a great time." David, clearly used to such scenes, smiled and teased, "Miss Anna is generous. Aren't you worried about investment failure?" She replied seriously, "How could I not be? Investment carries risk. You should enter the market cautiously. That's why only mutual benefit is worth investing in." Everyone laughed and started calling my name. Even the air seemed tinged with suggestion. The evening breeze lifted the hem of Willow's skirt. I stepped back half a pace. Under her gradually paling expression, I turned and walked away. "Next time we meet," I said calmly, "there's no need to come over and say hello." Chapter 14. After the reunion ended, David and I left together by car. As we drove through a long tunnel, an identical car approached from the opposite direction. In a fleeting moment, through a half-open window, I seemed to glimpse two figures inside. One was rubbing his temples in exhaustion. The other leaned back against the seat with eyes closed. Startled, I quickly turned my head to look again, but the car had already disappeared. David flipped through his new script and asked what I was looking at. The tunnel was about to end. Light gradually spilled in from ahead. I shook my head gently. Suddenly, I remembered that many years ago, when people were discussing the entanglement between Willow, Freya, and Makoto, they had once whispered about David and me as well. They had said, according to typical campus drama plots, those two would count as male supporting roles who loved but couldn't have. I had leaned over with a smile and asked, "Really? Then that story must be far too narrow. The world is huge. Life is long. No one is merely someone else's supporting role, including you, who are discussing us right now. After all, we are the protagonists of our own lives. Why should we ever settle for being supporting characters in someone else's story?"